every time I went to the doctor, they're like, it's MS. They gave me that diagnosis of MS and said, oh, you need to be on all this medication. And I knew that it happened with the tick bite. I wound up going to um, in the city to go see a doctor, and they said, yes, you have neurological Lyme disease. I had tremors. I, in the meantime, had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, which is really scary diagnosis, and lupus and fibromyalgia. So, I had a myriad of things. My hearing went, I have hearing aids, my eyesight, I had bladder problems, kidney problems, digestive problems, skin issues. And all of a sudden, the scariest part of this, though, was the mental component to it, which nobody really ever talks about.
Welcome to Unconventional Medicine. I'm your host, Brendan Gawker, a molecular biologist, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Jason Dubois. Jason is a registered clinical pharmacist with an expertise in immunology and organ transplantation. Today, I'm excited about this show in particular because we have a really good guest on, and the timing of this is really excellent. We're coming into spring as of the recording of this show. And with spring, you've got cookouts and boating, and people are going to be going into the forest and gardening and all that stuff. And there are some things that you ought to be keeping in mind. So without further ado, today's guest is Lisa Jay Eckert. She's founder of Three Moms Organics. She is an expert in tick-borne illnesses and a regular in D.C. advocating for Lyme disease research. Her efforts have been recognized by Cornell University. And I'm very happy to have her on the show today. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, we talked before we started taping, and you have a really interesting story, and I want the viewers to listen to this because I think this is, clearly nobody wakes up as like a 10 or 12-year-old girl and says, this is something that I'm going to spend my entire life doing, but there's obviously a reason why you're doing this, so.
Correct. It's scary reason. So I worked outside my whole life. I went to school for landscape design and greenhouse management. I've always loved to be outside. I also camped all the time. I lived in a tent for 6 months. I was always outside. I moved out to East Hampton and I was getting bit by ticks a lot. But I didn't think about it. I was young. I wasn't really paying attention. I, hold them off and kind of move on. And somewhere in my mid-20s, I started just I had mysterious pains, really debilitating headaches, all things that were not normal for me at the time. And time went on, I would go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you're just overworked. Or after I had kids, they're like, oh, you're raising kids. Nobody was paying attention. I had drenching night sweats. I couldn't think. It was like thinking through mud. And I kept saying there's something really wrong. And then one last tick bite, I had the ring. I went to the doctor. They put me on antibiotics. And all of a sudden I couldn't walk or talk.
Wow, that's scary.
So what was happening is which I didn't know then, and the doctors didn't know, but I was having a Herxheimer reaction.
Yeah.
So what was happening is my body was getting flooded with the toxins from the die out of the bacteria. I was rushed to the hospital, ambulance, lights and sirens. They were like, looks like you're having a stroke, but it was multi-sided. It was a whole big thing. I stayed in the hospital for about a week, and I left with the diagnosis of MS. And
oh, wow.
What
year was this, by the way?
So my kids were
about
little. My kids were little. I'm going to say 2005.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. And the reason I ask that is because, nowadays it seems like doctors are a little bit more aware that Lyme disease is out there and is present because it affects 500,000 people every year with new cases. But back in 2005, I saw a lot of these cases, and a lot of the doctors were completely baffled by this. I'm sorry. Go ahead with your story.
I had, because I had lesions in my brain, I had these dead areas in my brain. They gave me that diagnosis of MS and said, oh, you need to be on all this medication. And I knew that it happened with the tick bite. But I kept getting worse and not better. 3 months later, my husband got sick. He wound up in the hospital for 8 weeks. He had to learn how to walk and talk all over again. He also had a diagnosis of MS.
Wow.
So time rolls on. Nobody's really paying attention. Every time I went to the doctor, they're like, it's MS. That's why. And I'm like, it's not. I wound up going to in the city to go see a doctor, and they said, yes, you have neurological Lyme disease. I had tremors. I, in the meantime, had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, which is really scary diagnosis, and lupus and fibromyalgia. So, I had a myriad of things. My hearing went, I have hearing aids, my eyesight, I had bladder problems, kidney problems, digestive problems, skin issues, and all of a sudden, the scariest part of this, though, was the mental component to it, which nobody really ever talks about, right? When you have inflammation in your brain, it causes depression, it causes outbursts, it causes all these things that I never had before. Here I am in my 40s now, and I was never really depressed, but that inflammation in your brain causes all of these weird symptoms that I'd never had. We talk about there's a mental health problem in this country, but we don't talk about what the root cause of that is. And it's I'm not saying everybody has tick-borne disease, but what I'm saying is that inflammation can cause those things, and it's very much overlooked in tick-borne disease patients. But I wound up going to doctor in the city who said, you definitely have neurological Lyme disease. I was there for 3 days testing. You definitely have it, but we don't treat it. So I had to find a doctor to treat it. I wound up on a year course. Well, I wound up finding out too, I also had Ehrlichia and babiosis,
Okay.
which were the drenching night sweats in my 20s, right? So they.
So did these come about as a result of your immune system being repressed, or do you think this was associated with the tick bites?
These are all associated with the tick bites.
Tick bites. Yep, I got you.
All tick-borne. I had heart problems, like you name it, because Lyme disease is it's a multi-system. It attacks everything.
Yeah.
It's non-discriminatory when it comes to your body.
Lisa,
I had knee surgeries, like all through this whole thing. I don't think there's a joint that hasn't been operated on for me. But I finally wound up seeing a Lyme disease doctor in Mount Kisco, New York, and paying out of pocket because insurance wouldn't cover it. And I was on oral antibiotics and anti-malaria medication for the Babesia for 9 months. And then when that didn't really, I was at about 60%, but I wasn't at 100. They wound up putting a PICC line in, and I was on a PICC line for 3 months.
Wow.
While I continued the malaria medication. So I was on the Babesia medication for about a year. So
Lisa, let me ask you a question, because I'm just fascinated by your story. I want to back up to where you were seeing doctors and they were saying you had MS. And I think there might be several people watching this right now experiencing something similar to this. Walk me through what that conversation was like, because MS is something that I believe they can diagnose and, scan your brain and detect lesions in the brain and have a little bit more confirmatory. But were they going off symptoms? What were the initial symptoms that led them to say, this is MS?
When
go
I was in
home.
the hospital for that first week, which was the Herxheimer that sent me there, right?
Right.
That week, they scanned my brain and there was clearly lesions in my brain. So I have quite a few foci that, but it was such a sudden onset. There was no really, besides cognitive things or there was not really something we can really pinpoint before that, right? But all of a sudden, I went to bed one day and I woke up the next and I couldn't speak. I couldn't get the words. I had apraxia. Couldn't get the words from my brain to my mouth. And I had weakness on my left side and weakness on my right side. So if I stood standing, I would just fall to the left. So I like lost all my balance. And if I closed my eyes, I would really fall to the left. Like I had no sense of balance. I was walking down the hallway, holding on.
So you went through a series of antibiotic treatments, it sounds like. So they probably put you on.
They actually took me off the antibiotics.
They took you off. Why did they take you off the antibiotics?
Because they said it's MS and it wasn't Lyme disease, even though I still had the ring in the hospital.
And misdiagnosed. Yeah, you had the bullseye, which happens, from what I understand.
Had the EM rash.
Yeah.
In the hospital, and they took me off the antibiotics.
So you probably weren't on the typical course of antibiotics, I would assume.
I was on Doxy. So this was in my first 24 hours of Doxy that this whole thing happened.
So you went through this. You eventually got discharged from the hospital. And then what prompted you to seek further answers? What was like the tip off for you?
Because I knew it wasn't MS. I knew that it was clearly associated with this tick bite. I also knew that I had similar symptoms in the past after tick bites. Much less, but similar. So I kind of refused to go on the MS medications, and I did a really deep dive into what actually could be causing this. I couldn't just go to bed one day and wake up with MS the next, right? There should have been some sort of signs along the way.
Some progression.
Yeah. And it to me, the tick bite was clearly related to how I was feeling. And I'm glad I did not go on the MS medication. My neurologist actually dropped me. He goes, if you don't go on that medication, I will refuse to see you. I'm like, okay. So
stubborn patient. But it helped you.
About 50 doctors over 50 doctors, rheumatologists, and just trying to get, but the more I uncovered in research, the more I realized that I was correct. It could be directly related to the tick bite.
So how did you overcome the tick illness?
I was on a year course. I didn't go on antibiotics for Lyme disease until that's when I didn't go on it until about 2017.
Wow.
Is when I finally found the doctor. I was finally diagnosed by Columbia. That's what it was. I couldn't think of it before. Columbia Tick Resource Center in New York City. I was diagnosed with neurological Lyme, but they don't treat. They do diagnose, but they don't treat. And they sent me, you have to kind of find a doctor. And that's when through a bunch of research and other people, I found, actually it was my husband's cousin who said, you really need to go see this doctor in upstate New York. And I wound up going to see him. And, slowly I started to get better and I started to see the difference.
So what did the doctor in upstate New York do? Like, because you said they didn't treat it, they just gave you protocols. They what did they actually do for you?
From Columbia, they said, find a doctor that will treat you. You need IV Rocephin. Find a doctor that will treat you. They don't do the treatment. And my doctor was amazing. But I had to pay out of pocket. He saved my life. Literally saved my life. And what was interesting, what I found interesting in all my research is that Lyme disease is the smartest Borrelia burgdorferi, or any of the Borrelias, right, are an extremely intelligent bacteria. It's actually the smartest bacteria known to man right now. I'm sure there's others out there that are smarter, but it has the most genomes of any bacteria. it it has a protective layer around it called a biofilm. So those 2 weeks of antibiotics isn't going to really do much, right? Because that's the protocol. And the other thing I found extremely interesting is that syphilis and Lyme disease are more closely related than you and your first cousin genetically. And we
And that's
treat
interesting.
syphilis for 6 months. But we only treat Lyme disease for 2 weeks. And we treat syphilis for 6 months with a cocktail of antibiotics. We only treat Lyme disease for 2 weeks. And so that to me, there's something that's not making sense there in the medical world, which is why I work so hard looking at what's going on with tick-borne disease research. Like, I'm going to pull these numbers and they're not going to be correct numbers.
That's why we have
but-
Joe. Joe's the fact checker on our team.
All right.
Hey,
With
our producer,
malaria,
Joe.
For
Go
each
check.
malaria case. All right. I think for each malaria case, we spend $20,000 per patient. Lyme disease per patient is $90. $90. How many cases of malaria? And we have more people getting Lyme disease every year that are, and those are just the ones being diagnosed,
Right.
than they do that live in Miami. So now take everybody in Miami, right? They all, I mean, to me, those numbers are astounding. And those are just the ones being diagnosed. How many
Yeah,
are being,
So
how
I
many
looked,
are like me?
I looked this up before you came on, and statistics from 2022 showed that 476,000 new cases every year come online.
New
And
cases.
to your point, obviously there are cases that don't get reported at all, so we know that's higher, and there's a 10% annual increase on that. So it's
Correct.
like, I was talking to my wife about this. It's like, eventually everyone's going to have this.
That's
So
kind of what it seems like, right?
yeah, so you
Like,
better become accustomed to identifying the symptoms. And like what you had said earlier about the bullseye, only 50% of people actually get the bullseye. So if you don't see it, doesn't mean you don't have
You
the
don't
Lyme
have it.
Borrelia in your system.
and a lot of people, there's so many different Borrelias too, right? Like there's Borrelia miyamotoi. Like there's so many different, you can get, I think the number is, and I'm pretty sure this is correct, 18 different diseases from one tick bite. And most ticks are carrying more than one disease. 70% of the ticks in my town are carrying one or more diseases. 70%.
Yeah, wow.
Like those are bad odds, right? And I live in East Hampton, New York, so we're not even considered like tick capital of the world. So, and
Well,
this isn't.
Speaking of which,
It's
you and I were talking on the phone. I had actually started my company in the town next to Lyme, Connecticut, where it was identified back in the 70s. So,
was-
like, Connecticut, the whole northeast corner is basically swimming in this stuff. And as you
Yeah.
said, 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, they had no idea really what was going on when people were coming in with very strange symptoms.
Yeah. And it's such a myriad of symptoms, right? So I can understand that this is hard for doctors, right? Because I'm coming in with knee problems and heart problems and hearing and skin problems. Nobody's ever going to tie those things together. And so being so closely related to syphilis and knowing what we know about syphilis and the end result of syphilis is people lose their mind. The same thing is happening with Lyme disease, and it's not being either reported or it's not being treated properly. That's a frightening, people that's frightening statistics to me. If you have over 500,000 people getting Lyme disease a year, and even if a third of them are having mental health issues because of it, what that mean? That's terrifying. It's a terrifying concept to me.
Yeah, no, you bring up some really interesting points. And it's true that not all psychological problems for all Americans you can attribute to Lyme disease, but might be a frighteningly high percentage of them we're just not completely aware of. So you've
Correct.
really well encapsulated the emotional, psychological components of this issue. From a physiological angle, my understanding of it is that it's a spirochete. So that's and it's extremely small in nanometers as far as comparing to a lot of the other bacteria. So it's able to literally drill into tissues that a lot of other pathogens don't and won't have access to. And as you also correctly talked about, its biofilm, it's got an incredible defense system.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, from what I understand, from what I've picked up in researching it, it attacks the vitamin D receptors in our body. So it like really degrades the overall immune response. And
It's
Jason,
an immune evader.
Yeah.
It
And
can like right in front of, and go, you can't see me. It's like cloaked. Like our immune system doesn't really recognize it.
yeah,
And the tests are so inaccurate. Speaking of the immune system, right? The testing that they do now is based on your immune response to the bacteria. It doesn't, the
right.
blood tests that they take do not go in and go, okay, we're going to actually look for the bacteria. It doesn't.
Right. They
It looks
check for
for your
antibodies.
immune response to the bacteria. And
Yeah.
if it's an immune evader, the likelihood that you're going to test positive to those, what is it, Eliza, and something else.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is
the tests. Yeah.
yeah, is pretty low. And not only that, the only time your body's going to elicit that response is about 6 to 8 weeks after the bite.
I was
Now,
going to say, yeah.
if you don't have people knowing that they even were bit, right, or bitten, how if I say that properly, then how are they going to know to be tested, right? And a lot of people do not get sick in the first 6 months. It's not until, like, we always say, well, actually, a good doctor friend of mine says, bit in the summer, sick in the winter, right? Like he's
Yeah.
got actually has a T-shirt that says, bit in the summer, sick in the winter, because a lot of people don't get really sick initially, and then all of a sudden they're sick.
Yeah,
And
the
they can't
bacteria
understand
has
it.
this very unique ability to actually like hide in healthy cells. And so it can evade like normal
Correct.
immune detection and destruction, right? Because it just will jump inside a healthy cell for indeterminate amount of time. And this is where this like slower revelation of illness comes out, right? Because if it's hiding in the cell, it's really not causing some of the symptoms that are often associated with getting rid of a cell. The immune response to the bacteria is what a lot of times is eliciting the aches, the pains, the malaise. But you'll go through this process, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, you can go through this process of having this illness, but not really having symptoms. You might have a good day or a good week, and then you kind of relapse, right? And it's just
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. Like there's nothing very clear about, there's nothing really clear about it, which I can understand how that could be really hard for doctors, which brings me back to, we need better testing. And we need better physicians training, which is what I'm also kind of working on.
Was
Trying
that
to
RFK Jr. that was calling you right there, asking you to come down to Washington?
it might have had.
they see nothing.
I'm joking, but I know that you've gone down to DC and you're involved with an organization that's trying to increase funding and awareness. So we can
And
talk about that too.
That's it's an interesting process of what's happening. I commend him for understanding the tick-borne disease plight. I know nothing else about politics. I go down to Washington and I can speak to anybody because I know nothing about politics and I don't want to know. So I just don't. And that's why I can pretty much talk to anybody about it, because I have a problem. There is a true issue here in the United States, in every state. And I don't care where you stand. This is still the issue, right? It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat or if you're somewhere in the middle. The issue is still there. And
Yeah.
so we need to work together. This needs to be a bipartisan, a cumulative response to a very large epidemic right now.
Yeah, you raise a really good point, because this is really a national issue. I think when a lot of people think about Lyme disease, they're like, that's the stuff that happens up in the Northeast. It's not. It's everywhere. I hear from people out, especially out in the West and the Southwest and down in the South, it's spreading like wildfire. So this is definitely encompassed the entire nation. Yeah.
The Midwest, it's blowing people's minds. But there's a lot more than there was 20 years ago. There's a lot more information.
Yes.
Google is a great resource. When, there's some Center for Lyme Action is who I've been working with down in DC, and hopefully I'll be working with them within state, which would be great, because if it was me, I would want to shoot for mandatory physician training, like they do every year for CPR, or they do, they have to have CME credits. And this should be from a foot doctor, because you could have just a foot issue, right? So every doctor, every physician, everybody in the medical field, nurses, nurse practitioners, should all be having to have this as mandatory training. And
I agree with you. And it's also pretty clear that there are millions of people out there that have Lyme disease right now and don't know it. And I would also, this is a little bit of a warning, because I've run across this myself, is that if you end up taking a proteolytic or fibrinolytic enzyme, and all of a sudden you end up developing a lot of these symptoms that we're talking about, and we're going to list the symptoms too. So you could stop this and take a look at it and see if you have any of these. Hopefully you don't, but those things, it's the proteolytic, fibrinolytic enzymes break down the biofilm, and it can pull the Lyme Borrelia out of places in the body where it's hiding, and then of course you end up having to battle a full-blown Lyme.
Which is that Herxheimer, which sent me to the hospital in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen that happen, where it kind of goes in dormant and then it comes full-blown again.
Well, going back to the bacteria itself, we were talking about how it is an immunovator and hides in healthy cells. It also changes form. It's not always a spirochete. It could be in an L form. It could be in its own little ball, which is a C form. There are many different. It goes into different forms depending on what's attacking it or what's happening within its life cycle.
I did not know that. So that's another way that it evades the defense system.
Correct. It can hide while you're on antibiotics for your 2 weeks, and it'll just chill out and just hide somewhere, wait for the onslaught of antibiotics to be over, and come back out again. So to treat it is usually long term. You're not, just like treating syphilis is a long term plan when people have syphilis. It's not easy. It's not like 2 weeks said and done. What I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Jason, but strep throat, I believe, lives for 20 minutes, lives, breeds, and dies in 20 minutes. And you're on antibiotics for 10 days. There's a mathematical thing that they do that brings you to that, okay, in order to hit all those life cycles, you need to be on antibiotics for 10 days. Lyme disease lives for 28 days, one cell, lives, breeds, and dies in 28 days. And we're only on antibiotics for 2 weeks, and it's only one antibiotic. It just, to me, mathematically, that doesn't make sense, right? The original protocol for Lyme disease, if you had it, was 28 days of Rocephin, IV antibiotics. That was the original protocol. That's how you would get rid of it. And that is no longer, it's now 2 weeks of Doxy. which doxy does not break the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
So if you do have it and it is neurological or it is happened to be in your nervous system, you're not hitting that with doxy.
Yeah.
Or you're not hitting it completely with
I'm
doxy.
not
Am I
sure.
correct?
Probably the antibiotic doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier in significant amounts. I do know the
Right.
early protocol for early onset Lyme is doxycycline. And it's been proven to be about pretty high, about 95% effective. The problem is that a lot of people that finally figure out, hey, I have an issue, there's something going on, they're out of that early stage and they're into there's early,
Correct.
mid, and late. And you want to try to catch it in the early stage. And that's
Correct.
where, you got to look for have you been out in the woods? Did you recently have a tick bite that, a lot of people aren't even aware they've had a tick bite. And then you look for that red ring. And sometimes, you're in that window of 3 to 10 days where doxy is going to be the most effective. If you
Right.
miss that window,
Correct.
you're kind of, you could be in trouble, right? So then you start developing potentially neurologic issues, other health issues that could be long-term. And then you have to escalate that to Rocephin. So
Yeah.
if it crosses over the blood-brain barrier, I don't have any knowledge on that. I would have to see what options are available, if at all, in that instance. But yeah, you bring up a good point.
Yeah. Mine crossed the blood-brain barrier. That's why the Rocephin for 3 months for me was the answer. After, my doctor at the time, who's a fabulous Lyme specialist, he swept out, as he called it, all the closets with the long-term antibiotics and then oral antibiotics, and then did the triple whammy. But when I went on the IV antibiotics on my 3rd day, it was like, what's the ruby slipper? What's the Wizard of Oz, right? And when it goes from black and white to color, exactly what happened to my world. I was like, I've been living like this for 20 years. Like on the 3rd day, everything just kind of was like, wow. So, like I said, a lot of our systems are controlled by our nervous system, right? Like your hearing, your heart, like your vascular system. Like there's so many things that come into play, and mine was clearly neurological, and clearly
So for
all
the
of these
person,
things were affected.
Brendan, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in on you, but the person that's listening to this and is resonating
go
with
ahead.
them, what are 2 pieces of advice that you could give someone today that's to help shorten their journey and get them the help they need? And I think if we could just distill it down into 3 pearls of wisdom that you've learned in your journey.
So one, I would go to ilads.org, which is International Lyme and Associated Disease .org. Those are made up of the best doctors in the world, geared towards Lyme disease. And there's a lot of resources on there for where to find those doctors. I would make sure your physician is an ILADS trained doctor, which some are. That would be 1. 2, I wouldn't just take the regular Lyme disease test into consider. I would make sure you would get a different test from Hygienics or something like that, and it's pricey, but they're very accurate. And 3, I would say don't give up hope. If you really, it's you have to be your own advocate, and your own body, and don't let the doctors tell you that, oh, you're crazy, or oh, you're just tired because you have children, or oh, I'm a spitfire. If I'm not getting out of bed, there's clearly something wrong. And that lasted for years. Yourself well enough. You know what it's like to be well, and you know what it's like to be sick. And trust your instincts and do your research. It's We're states like Pennsylvania are making it mandatory for doctors to get this training,
Yeah,
and
that's good.
we're hoping that all the other states follow suit. Like, really, that's what we're doing with the Center for Lyme Disease.
Yeah, and
There's so I keep forgetting we're talking so much about Lyme disease. There's so many other tick-borne diseases that you can get from a tick bite that we
yeah,
haven't even touched.
before we get into that, and I agree with you, that's something that I think is critical, and I think the viewers will be very interested in hearing what other things are also taking place with tick-borne illnesses that we haven't discussed yet. As far as the other treatments are concerned, I've run across a number of people where one person in particular that was quite close to me who did not get treatment within that window and was also, as luck would have it, she had an allergic reaction to doxy, so she couldn't do that one at all. And so the physician ended up putting her on sort of a cocktail of antibiotics, and it was more or less completely ineffective. On top of that, of course, it negatively impacted her overall immune system because you're knocking out a ton of beneficial bacteria on top of that. So there are unconventional treatments, and this is not medical advice, but I will say that she ended up going down a treatment path that was more along the lines of Rife technology. And for her, in that one instance, and I can't say that this is going to be true for everybody, that was extremely effective, and it's gone into remission. So, as you said before, don't lose hope. And sometimes you can't always listen to the physician because they don't always have the answer. They're
And
practicing just like everybody else.
correct. And like you said, just like the disease does not look the same on everybody, the treatment does not look the same
Great
on
point.
everybody. That was just my story. And some people are very much against antibiotics. I understand that and support them. But there are um, like Center for Lyme Action where you can get information. There's LymeDisease.org where you can get information. There's Bay Area Lyme Disease where you can get information. All of those are very reputable. And I think I said ILADS. I might have said it twice, but now.
Yeah, and we're going to have all of these resources in the show notes, so people don't have to go off and try and hunt around and find these things. We'll make sure that it's right below the video.
Yeah, there's
So
be a lot of erroneous information out there. Those are very
yeah,
trusted sites and sources.
yeah. Thank you, Lisa, for making that available and so that we know where to send people. So let's talk about some of the other tick-borne illnesses that people might run into as well, because I know that that's the majority. Like Lyme disease is 480,000 as of 2022. It's probably up over 300 now. But some of these other ones affect 10, 15, 20,000 people a year too.
Correct. I had, as I mentioned before, babiosis, and that is a malaria-like organism. So it's not a bacteria, it's not a virus. It's what do they call it? A zoo? What is
Yeah,
it? A zoo?
do something. Zoonotic. Maybe I got that.
Yes,
Zoonotic.
zoonotic.
Zoonotic,
So
yes.
I had 3 letters of that. But that it acts very much like malaria, and what it does is it goes into the red blood cells and it pops them, and so it can look a lot like cancer. So I actually had been to a cancer doctor, a hematologist, for probably about 6 months trying to figure out why I was coming up with these yellow bruises all over my body. It's exhausting. I had air hunger. So there were a lot of things. There's some things that cross over with Lyme disease, so it was kind of impossible to tell what was what. But even the funniest and not funny part is I had been testing for Babesia. They had been testing me for babiosis the whole time. I was always positive for it, and they just were like, everybody tests positive for that,
Wow.
that was terrifying. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? I
That's interesting.
went to go. I had been giving blood every year for the blood drive.
Oh, that's even more
They,
terrifying.
you
Okay.
know, when they started testing, when they started testing, you want to know
No. Are you
when?
talking about like the Red Cross when they started identifying this stuff? No. When?
Yeah, it was about 8 years ago.
Oh boy. Okay.
So they were passing.
So up to 2017, this was definitely in the
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Okay.
like jumped for joy when they had stopped sending that blood around. But how are you not testing for things like that? And we're, you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
um, anyway, that, and I also had Ehrlichia, which has very kind of similar symptoms to Lyme disease and Babesia. Those symptoms kind of cross over. The Babesia was kind of harsh. It was kind of hard to get rid of, but I finally did okay. Another scary thing, and I don't know if your listeners know this, but Lyme disease can be passed in utero. I gave it to my daughter. I was pregnant with her. I had actually gotten a tick bite. I had actually had the EM rash. And the doctor said, "Oh, well, you're pregnant and you don't have any symptoms, so we're not going to treat you
Wow.
because it's dangerous for the baby." Well, my daughter was born with Lyme disease. She was born with heart problems, bladder problems, and 3 separate autoimmune diseases.
Hmm.
So she's doing great. She's thriving now. But, it wasn't until she was 14 that we wound up getting her treated. I took her to the same doctor, seeing similar symptoms. And she wound up being
So
treated for about 3 months.
so let me interrupt for a second. So for parents out there, obviously specifically mothers who have had Lyme disease and have given birth to children and are in this situation, are you saying that the symptoms didn't show up until she was 14?
No, the symptoms were always there. They weren't detected. They
Okay.
weren't associated with. I actually got to see a great neurologist. She was passing out and turning blue. So she had a bunch of things happening to her.
Yeah.
Heart issues, passing out and turning blue, which usually they associate with brain, right? It's like one of two things. It, she was cleared. It wasn't her heart that it was doing it, but they considered it neurological at this point.
Well,
So
that's not scary
she,
for a mother at all.
oh my Lord, it happened. She was in the bathroom and I couldn't get in. She had blocked the door. It was terrifying. It was
Oh, that's
terrifying.
awful. Yeah.
Um, but I had saw a neurologist out of Stony Brook University who said, I said, "Look, I am now seeing a Lyme doctor in upstate New York." And she looked at me and she said, "Stay with that doctor for as long as you can." Like, the protocol is her protocol, or the general protocol for neurologists is to not treat, or and her test kept coming back negative, negative, negative. And but she had seen this enough to know that this was clearly, she fell into that pattern
Yeah.
of what can happen. Um, when I took her to the doctor in upstate New York, they had done something, and I honestly can't remember what it was. It could have been like sequencing the gene, right, the
Yep.
Lyme disease gene, to see kind of how old it was, and they said this is as old as she is. So we wound up, and I clearly remember the bite when I was pregnant. So
So
she's
tell me
doing great
about.
now.
I'm going to segue because
Right.
Yeah. No. Of
I
course.
can't wait any longer. I want to hear about this company you founded. Obviously, it is way beyond a passion project. Three moms organics. You created a very
Three
unique
moms are.
blend of spray, obviously out of your own passion, your own background. Um, Tell me more about this. Tell me what's in it. Tell me how it works or where we can get it. Tell me everything.
All right. So I couldn't use traditional repellents because I had neurological Lyme disease. So repellents that had
Mm.
permethrin or DEET or
Yeah.
any of those things really brought a lot of my symptoms back. I would get tremors again. I would have heart palpitations. I would have those weird, blurry things that happen. And I told you before, I camp all the time. There's a camper in my driveway. I garden. I went to school for landscape design. Am I never going outside again? Like, what can I put on me? I tried a bunch of the natural repellents and I was not seeing much success. You know, I have 2 dogs, and the likelihood of you getting having dogs ups your chances by like 70% of getting a
Yeah.
tick-borne disease, right?
Yeah.
Tick buses in your
yeah.
house.
Yeah. So, I want to add that I failed chemistry not once but twice. I was going to school to be a science teacher, and I couldn't pass chem. So just putting that out there. Dyslexia is really hard on that math component of chemistry. I decided to just I had a friend of mine who was making a concoction from oils, and did a deep dive into anything. So there's a lot of illegal repellents out there. When you go shopping, you can't just like pick up a repellent. When you go to like a farmer's market and there's repellents out there, they're not registered repellent, right? You have to follow the EPA guidelines. And the
It's
reason
highly
why the
regulated.
EPA puts these into place is for safety measures. So they only allow certain types of oil. Like you can't use lavender or tea tree. So if your repellent has lavender or tea tree in it, it's an illegal repellent, right? It's just is. I had my kitchen look like an apothecary. Envisioning it now. I put different colors, different oils were associated with different colors and different things. Like I made the glycerin a certain color. So I put it together and I would shake it up and I'd let it sit there and I would watch the separation process. What was working better? Water, vinegar, like what? And I just kind of did it that way. I did a deep dive into what repels ticks and how can I keep my family safe? How can I keep myself safe? And that's what I came up with was this, which is cedarwood, geranium, citronella, peppermint, rosemary, and lemongrass.
Oh, those are
It's
good.
also vinegar, water, glycerin, and vanillin or vanilla. And the vanilla is in there actually not to make it smell good or to cut the oil smells, because sometimes, oils can be harsh for people. And everybody's like, oh, I like that there's vanilla in there. It kind of is like it softens it up. And I said, actually, the vanilla's in there because it binds to the oils chemically and it holds it on your skin longer.
Wow,
And
that's
so
interesting.
that's why that's in there. It's not for the smell at all. We're a registered natural repellent in all 50 states, which means we had to be as effective as DEET at 2 hours to be registered. You have to prove efficacy data. You have to do safety data. You have to make sure that your product is safe for people, dogs, and horses is what we claim. Shouldn't use anything with essential oils on cats ever, because cats lack an enzyme in their liver. So they can't process out the essential oils. So our competitors say that you can use it on cats, but I refuse to be
Don't
that
do that.
careless with people's animals. So
What's
yeah,
what's
that's
the
how
one
I
ingredient
designed it.
that you gotta have in there? Like what's the secret sauce? All of them.
All of them.
Oh,
Like
right.
there's a reason, like vinegar actually repels ticks, and it's also a preservative. Cedarwood is an excellent tick repellent and on its own. It actually will dissolve the innards of a tick. So ticks know to kind of stay away from it. Geranium is great. Peppermint is great. Lemongrass also really good for mosquitoes, and citronella good for mosquitoes. Those two are more for mosquitoes than ticks, but they also repel ticks.
Yeah,
So
that's excellent.
they're not as strong as the cedarwood and the geranium, but the vinegar also helps to repel them. Ticks
You
like
may You may not have been able to
Yeah.
go through organic chemistry,
Yeah,
but you're definitely a scientist. If you were putting this stuff together in your kitchen,
Yeah.
I wanted to be a
you're
science
certified.
teacher, and I
You're
couldn't
you're
pass
you're right up there with the
chem.
Yeah.
LSD
So
guy who's
hard.
creating LSD by accident or mistake or intentional. I don't know. One of
He didn't
those.
pass either.
So, how do I get
Yeah.
my hands on this? Where do I find this? Because I know you're a budding entrepreneur, or you're probably beyond a budding entrepreneur by now. But
Yeah.
I've seen you at the shows. You're doing well. You just had a metric ton downloaded into your living room there, right? So we've got the supply, and I know there's
House.
demand. How do people get it?
You can get it from our website at 3momsorganics.com. Amazon has it. They're a behemoth though. So if, we're a made safe product too. So I wanted to mention this. We just got our certification, which means there's no neurotoxins, there's no
There you
endocrine
go.
disruptors, there's nothing in the
important.
product. It's non-GMO. There's nothing in the product. We're the only repellent in the world to be a made safe repellent. So that's something. And
That's
that was
an
a
impressive
really,
claim. Yeah.
yeah. So we're also 1% for the planet. So although Amazon has been great to us and they keep a lot of repellents off the market, the legal ones, they're very good at policing that. I'd really love it if you came
And
to our
you're
site
in
and
health food stores,
ordered
right?
from us.
Yeah. Go direct.
We're in health food stores. Yeah, we're in a bunch. You can look on our website and Google the areas. We're in a bunch of health food stores. Nothing big yet, but we're working up to that. Yeah, a bunch of pet shops. And our website is really, it's usually, if you order before 11 a.m., the package goes out in that day's mail. Like
Nice.
I don't really miss a day.
Good products, good service. That sounds good.
Well,
I like that.
I also put a card in there with every order that you get, which you don't get on Amazon, which tells you a lot about the ticks, their diseases, and what happens if you have a tick and how to take it out.
Nice
So
educational
education
piece.
is really important to me. So, you get
How
better
do you
service
use-
with us than
Sorry. How do you use
Well,
this
I'm
product? How do you use it?
I'm
What's
not-
the directions
I'm
on
not-
there?
shake well and spray liberally. Like any repellent, even if you have like deep woods off and you miss the back of your legs, the tick is going to crawl up the back of your leg, right? Like just with us, because we don't have any parabens or SLS, you have to shake it. It's going to separate. I didn't want to put parabens and I didn't want to put SLS in our product. So any of those products that you don't have to shake are guaranteed that that's what's going on, right? You have
Right. And those are
SLS
dangerous emulsifiers. So you've
Yeah.
avoided putting those in. So yeah, it's good
Correct.
advice. And
Just-
I'll tell you, I'm located up here in New Hampshire. I still have snow in my front yard, and I pulled off 2 ticks off my dog. So
Yeah.
I think it's also important to tell people when they need to be doing it, because a lot of times they'll go outside and it's like, well, it's not 50 or 60 degrees yet. I don't have to worry about that. This is not
anything
true.
above freezing. Ticks are active at anything above freezing. That's their, like use that as your metric. If you're hiking and it's 38 degrees, 42 degrees, know that the likelihood of you coming into contact with the tick is higher, just know that that's what's going to happen or could happen. Not saying going to.
So pick it up early in the spring, use it throughout, use it into the fall, because that's when they kick up again. They like the cold weather. So it's for
Yeah,
all
well-
the viewers, that's when you got to do it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Like they don't know that, everybody thinks summer and ticks. Actually, ticks like the cooler weather, the moisture weather. And so in the height of the summer is when your mosquitoes are really bad. But ticks usually, as long as it's been dry, they're not as bad in the height of the summer. It's the cooler weather. It's the spring. It's
Right.
the fall. And a lot of people don't even think the fall. They think, oh, summer's over. I'm going to take my kids out for Halloween. And, we're going to go parading through the woods, or the leaves, which is tick's favorite habitat.
Right.
So spray yourself down. Just, I don't care what repellent you use. I don't care if it's mine. I don't care if it's my competitors. Most of my competitors are absolutely fantastic and are doing it for the same reasons I am. But use something. You want to use the chemicals? Shoot, go for it. Use something. It's
Yep.
really dangerous out there. I mean,
Lisa,
what did we say? Every year, as many people that live in Miami get Lyme disease.
right.
That's scary.
Yeah,
And that's every year.
That's a crazy
That's not
statistic.
cumulative.
Lisa, can you leave the viewers with how can they find you? Some other resources that we'll also put in the show notes, but if you could just tell us so, that'd be great.
3momsorganics.com. Come to our Shopify site. We would love for you to follow us on Instagram. We're always giving information. That's under 3Moms Organics. Facebook, I believe it's the same. 3Moms Organics. I think I'm on TikTok, but it's really not my jam. Yeah, I would love for you to just come follow us, come grab some information, come buy our product. It really works. But I don't care what product you use a product. It doesn't have to be mine. It doesn't have to be, it could be my competitor. It could be chemicals, DEET and all that. But whatever it is, use something.
Yeah, it's very clear, Lisa, that you really care about this. And I think what we have gone over is really important. People, we went over treatment, we went over prevention, we went over symptoms. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. And we're going to be coming back with Lisa in the next show too. Lisa, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.